Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&As. So let's go ahead and get this started. All right, first question. How do I leg train for strength when I have severely inflamed hip joints? Been going on for months now, and any attempt to rehab makes it worse. What can be done that won't agitate the hip joints? Well, you probably need to look at your overall training, but yes, I will agree in my experience, and again, having dealt even with clients who have physiotherapists prescribe them stuff for their hip joints who have had a history of hip problems. Half the time, the stuff just makes it worse. And because then they get more aggressive with it and more aggressive, and before long, they're getting into overuse with all their little band exercises and everything. What I would recommend is this is why we rotate movements. This is why we rotate movements. Now, if you're having some inflamed hips, you probably have weak glutes. So I'm going to say probably getting in and doing some glute bridges. And when I say do glute bridges, I do not mean hip thrusts. I mean glute bridges. I made a whole tutorial on both. Get your glutes stronger. It's half your problem. This is also one of the reasons we rotate stuff in conjugate is to relieve stress on these areas. And in other words, you can run through phases where you're doing wide stance box squats. Okay, you can do real wide stance box squats and sumo deadlifts, and that includes your max work, your speed work, whatever. And then you can rotate over to a wave of conventional deadlift. And it's the same even with your squats, right? You can rotate over to box squats with a narrower stance, if need be, if your hips are getting too fatigued. Now, what's the issue we run into with that? Well, that tends to put a lot of strain on your back. So if you were to do that too long, in theory, you might start getting more overuse accumulating there. So here's the point. Rotating between these things is beneficial. You know, this is beneficial for protecting your low back. It's beneficial for protecting your hips because we're not putting excessive strain on these areas for prolonged periods of time. We're rotating through them. This is one of the reasons it's important to rotate through lifts. It's one of the reasons you guys see me changing up bars and stuff all the time. Sometimes even within the same week. Right? We rotate through these different things because it puts stress differently on different joints so that we can avoid overuse problems. So what you probably need to do for a phase is get in and do some conventional pulling. You may have to mess with some narrower stance box squatting. You might have to work with a high box. Don't try to go on a low box if you have inflamed hips. Get a couple inches above parallel if you have to. Work on a narrow stance conventional pull. Work on glute bridges. Build your glutes up. Build your back up. And then when these things are relieved, you can go over and run some phases of sumo pulls and wider stance box squats and then rotate them back out. Right? This is how we avoid these sort of problems. This is one reason why minimalist training doesn't work for most people, at least beyond the novice phase. All right, next question. If you stop training for a certain reason, how long does it take before strength gains or muscle gains deteriorate? Well, this is why I recommend that you don't stop training completely, ever, for any reason, unless it's doctor's orders. If you have a medical doctor who is telling you not to train, then by all means, follow that doctor's advice. I'm not going to counter their advice. However, I will say that when doctors told me to quit training, it was the worst mistake, one of the worst mistakes of my life. I'll put it in the top 4. Top 4 to top 5 worst mistakes I ever made in the entirety of my life was to stop training when my doctor told me to. Okay? I regret that to this day. I regret that to this day. Biggest mistake of my life, one of the top 5. And I've had some doozies. So that lets you know how serious that was. I took bad advice from a doctor. So, that being said, I'm not going to counteract your doctor's advice, though. So unless you have a doctor telling you not to train, then don't quit training. Do something. But what are our time frames? Strength varies. For me, I lose strength within 7 or 8 days sometimes. In other words, if I haven't hit heavy singles, my max strength starts to go down. People say, well, that's not the only type of strength. That is the only type of strength. We measure strength with a 1 rep max. That is how we measure it, for a lot of reasons that I've covered that repeatedly in the past. For me, it can happen within 7 to 8 days sometimes. Me personally, for you, it might take longer. Right? For you, it might take longer. I have lifters who've retained all their strength. They've had to take 2 or 3 weeks off or go to a 2 to 3 week deload or whatever due to a surgery or whatever, minor surgery. Come back and they're back to hitting PRs. So it really varies by the person. Muscle loss, approximately 2 weeks is where you start losing muscle. So again, we had kind of covered in one of the other questions that we had recently, and someone had asked, about muscle loss, and yeah, you're looking at about 2 weeks before it starts to set in. So people say, wait a minute, are you telling me if I go 10 days without training that I won't lose any muscle? Yeah, that's correct. This has been researched. Yep. Furthermore, when we do lose muscle, particularly as slightly more advanced lifters, when you've completely finished out your novice phase, they're semi-permanent changes. And in other words, if you train all the way to an advanced level as a lifter and then you took 3 years off from training, you will still probably be stronger and carry more muscle mass than the day you walked in the gym. Even if you've gone years without training. And you will regain very, very quickly, and we know that. Okay, lost muscle tissue doesn't mean that your body has lost the ability to regain that muscle, and it doesn't mean there aren't permanent structural changes. Just the fibers reduce back down a bit. But it takes about 2 weeks for it to start, and then it progresses from there. Okay, but you don't lose any muscle for about 2 weeks on average. Again, should tell you a lot. Guys think they're shrinking magically overnight. There's no way. It doesn't happen. Some water loss or something has occurred. So about 2 weeks for that, for it to even start. All right, next question and last question of the week. Hi, Coach. Would you recommend deadlift GM and GHR in the same day, or should I split them in different days, and how? And deadlift variations carry over for deadlift conventional? To the first question, short answer, yes. Long answer, yes. Just kidding on the long answer part. You've seen me deadlift, do good mornings and GHRs in the same workout on camera. So if you've seen me do it, perfectly fine. Now, we come over to how much total training volume can you handle? How many total sets are you trying to do of all these? There's your problem. Okay, because I've done squats, deadlifts, GMs, and GHR in the same day on speed days. On a heavy day, I'm not going to try to do heavy rep work on a squat, deadlift, and good morning in the same day. I'm not going to do more than 2 of them. GHR, easy. You can throw GHR in any of your lower days. That's not a problem. It's a hamstring exercise. It's easy to recover from. Well, not for your hamstrings. GHRs, when you do them hard, will make your hamstrings cramp. You better be ready to massage, get blood flow and stuff to those hamstrings. Again, a good massager helps. But GHRs, not a big deal. They're relatively easy exercises to recover from. They're essentially a single joint movement, unless you're doing the whole hip movement and everything, and I don't think that's particularly beneficial. I don't think that helps build your hamstrings, and that's what the GHR really is about. So realistically, this would be a very hamstring dominant day. If you did deadlifts, good mornings, and GHR the same day, well, it's a very hamstring specialized day, isn't it? Well, obviously back too. So that would be fine. As far as deadlift variation carryovers for the conventional, God, every deadlift builds your conventional. The exception being the trap bar. A lot of coaches and lifters have noticed that getting stronger on the trap bar doesn't seem to carry over to anything. Like, it doesn't carry over to any type of other deadlift for some reason. But interestingly enough, the sumo deadlift, which, half the reason that people do the trap bar, half the reasons they list for doing it would actually be better suited if they just did the sumo. Right? But that's too much to cover in this video. Sumo deadlift carries over to conventional. Romanian deadlift carries over to conventional. Okay? If you get a lot stronger at either one of those, your conventional deadlift will probably go up slightly. been my experience of a lot of other lifters out there also. Good choices. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.